Very good evening, everybody. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, and a warm welcome to what, by my outfit, would appear to be a rather tropical day in Johannesburg. It's actually a little cool outside, particularly cool inside in the cellar. In the next few weeks, I'm going to introduce you to a new addition to the Dan Really Likes Wine cellar. It's something called a CoolBot. It's a small American piece of technology that allows you to take one or two standard air conditioning units, which don't usually work in a slightly bigger cellar, and not only allow them to work, but allow you to manage the whole process from an app on your phone wherever you are in the world. I still haven't got the bot to be able to shut down the cellar while I'm away and my wife has the keys, but I'm working on that particular security precaution. Even if she does get in, though, I know that certain elements of my cellar are safe. Regular viewers will know that my Philistine of a wife does not drink white wine, which means our focus for this evening is one she would not touch. And gee, is she missing out, because it has become, over the last few years, and particularly just the last 2 or 3, one of the coolest grapes in South Africa. It is Colombar, not Colombar with a D. I don't know why. I'm hoping one of our guests this evening can tell me. It's a grape that for a very long time largely just went into brandy and often made some really good brandy. But when it was reserved for white wine, it was that white wine that generally had you with a fairly heavy head for the next day or two, promising never to touch the stuff ever again. Well, those days are long past, certainly at the top end, because a number of South Africa's top winemakers, a number of South Africa's coolest winemakers have added that cool factor to Colombar. And we've got 5 of them on the show this evening to find out why it's doing so well, what the appeal is for the winemakers, and what you're able to do with it, because one of our winemakers is actually turning it into Cup Classique, and there's a very good chance you've had it without actually realizing that it was Colombar. It is a cracker of a bubbles, and it's one of the wines we're celebrating in our tribute to Colombar on Dan Really Likes Wine this evening. Those winemakers are lined up and raring to go. They've stepped away from harvests to come and join me and to join you, and they'll do that in just a moment. First of all, though, here's your latest wine news. Well, this was a really, really cool afternoon yesterday. I made the long trek up, passport in hand, to Pretoria, to Times Square, and to one of the many restaurants that the complex includes. This is by some distance the leading light of those restaurants, 40's Grill and Bar, but it wasn't 40 or even his food that I went to see, as good as both are. It was instead Moshe Muller, the lady in shot with me. She is the head chef at Pink Valley, down in the Helderberg, part of the Otto group, right next door to Taibosch, so falling under Skulk Willem Joubert's ambit. And the Ottos have also got estates in Italy, in Sicily in particular, in Spain and in France. And so together with Abigail Donnelly styling the food and Emile Joubert adding his touch with a pen, they've produced The Harvest Table, a book that's already won a number of awards. And yes, it is a cookbook to a degree. The recipes all paying tribute to the different terroirs, to the locales of the different estates, and drawing from local produce and local culinary tradition. But it's far more than just that. It's a story about the different wine farms themselves, about the areas in which they find themselves, the wines that they make, and the people involved. The photography, young guy called Toby, who's done it all, is terrific. The touch from Moshe with her recipes are great. What I love about them is they are accessible. This is not one of those cookbooks where you open it and every single one has got 8 ingredients you've never heard of, and the kind of technique that requires a long period of time with Margot Janssen and Fioren learning how to make them all. They are things that you and I can make on a fairly simple basis. Perhaps not quite so well as Moshe, but it's a lovely book. That was launched up in Pretoria yesterday. It's available exclusive books or directly from Pink Valley or Le Chant or from Taibosch, the 3 estates. It's a fun read, it's an interesting read, and it's a lovely story of the Otto vineyards around the world. So thank you, Moshe. Highly, highly recommended. Right, these are some of the wines that are up for grabs this week. It is the latest Strauss wine auction, one of their timed auctions, which means it kicked off on Monday and finishes this coming Monday, closes at 6 p.m. So from about 5 p.m., people will start going nuts. And it's a combination of some top Syrah and other similar styles of wine. You'll see a few South Africans there. Arena Bornens Boschkloof, one of the latest members of the Cape Winemakers Guild. Chris and Andrea Molyneux with their Iron, some AA Bardinals, but also some wine from France, some Côte d'Iron, some Hermitage, some of the Syrahs that come from France. I think there's actually some really good value in some of that French stuff, judging on what they've priced it at as an estimate. Will you get it at that, though? I don't know. It depends who is buying and what they're paying. But if you nip along to the Strauss website, you can get all the details and see if there is some money to be spent between now and Monday evening on the latest Strauss auction. And then, speaking of auctions, the big one comes up Saturday. We had Paul Kluver and Wendy Applebaum on the show on Monday talking about this. I will be down at Harsendal hosting the auction on Monday night. 22 lots, everything from holidays on private islands off Madagascar to extraordinary trips up to Cheetah Plains, lots and lots of wine options for you, or just the chance to give back with a gift of giving that rewards you with nothing more than the knowledge that you have helped the many, many causes that the Cape Wine Auction Trust supports and has done now for a decade, because this is 10 years since that very first one. It is in partnership with MasterCard. The last few tickets are available at Web Tickets. Alternatively, you can follow the auction online and place bids on the various lots. So you might see me, I might not see you, but either way, it is a great, great cause. It's a great space. It's a lot of fun. And the capewineauction.com is where you'll find the details. And if you are not joining us in person to Harsendal on Saturday, at least log on Saturday evening, glass in hand, and perhaps purchase yourself something rather special for a very, very good cause. Right, well, let's move on to today's show and a love of Colombar. And there are a couple of things that inspired this particular show. One of them was it 2 years ago now? I'll get the man himself to confirm. When Ian Naudé, he's a good dear friend to the show, managed to get a 5-star platter rating for Colombar. Now, that would never have happened, sure, even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, not a chance. 5 stars for a Colombar, an old vine at that. And suddenly people started talking about Colombar and muttering about it, and then mentioning, oh, no, Sakkie's doing some Colombar, and I think Lukas has got some, and John's doing some in bubbles, and the Carinuses have got some great stuff. And then at Cape Wine last year, arguably the most talked about wine at the entire show was that Colombar from Sakkie. He'd moved on from Vengeful Crayfish and found a new home with Colombar. So Sakkie Mouton joins us, so too does Ian Naudé. Lukas van Loggerenberg is back on the show. Danie Carinus makes his debut, and it's been a few years since we've had John on. I think it was the Cape Winemakers Guild last time, joining us as well. Is an all-star collective. If I was in person, I'd have my autograph book out and be asking for selfies. Guys, a warm welcome. Lovely to have all of you on the show and celebrating a grape that is fascinating me at the moment, because it's gone from really low in the opinion of most to something that's got a real cult status and more. Now, and I think a big part of that, Ian, to kick off, is the fact that somehow you managed to con the team at Platter into thinking that 5 stars for a Colombar was a really good idea. You obviously found in this Colombar, in this vineyard, something that you thought was really special. You translated it in something even more so. Tell me a bit about that story of finding this Colombar and creating a wine that the judges decided was worthy of 5 stars.
Is that? I wish I had that influence to ask people for a 5-star, but no, I didn't. You know, it's interesting, and it's so good because Janus, the winemaker from Greece, is here as well. I tasted their Certico a couple of years ago in Greece, and I thought, what a phenomenal grape. And I came back to South Africa, and Janus Falambus came to visit me, and he said, let's plant some Certico in South Africa. And I said, you know what, I'm not from the West Coast. The best guy to talk to would be Sakkie. And we went up and we went to meet Sakkie and we saw the whole thing. And then as we wanted to start planting the Certico, COVID broke out. And I was up in the area where Sakkie comes from, the Vredendal area, West Coast. And I said to Sakkie, show me, what is the grapes from this area? And he said, Colombar and a couple of other things. And I thought, no, there's nothing I want here. And then literally we went past one of his family's blocks, and that was the Colombar. And I said, "What is this?" And he said, "Colombar." And I thought, no, not for me. And then this thing just grew on me. And I contacted him again and again and again. And I said, "Sakkie, okay, I'm going to take 3 tons of that Colombar." And to be very honest with you, I tasted the grapes and I thought, where will I blend this in? Will it be with a Chenin Blanc? Will it be in another blend? But I never thought of putting it as a cultivar. And then I tasted the grapes, and when I started making it, I thought, no, this is perfect. It's time for Colombar to shine. But I also knew I could not put Colombar on the label because nobody's going to buy a Colombar. And I got to the name Langpad, which is the long road. And I found out at that stage that Colombar and Chenin Blanc was the first 2 white grapes planted in South Africa. And because the grapes is about 3.5, 4 hours from here. And I thought, I'll first trick people into this because I thought it was brilliant. And then we'll work around this Colombar thing. And I put Colombar on the back label. And then the miracle happened, COVID, as I wanted to launch this wine. And I sent a couple of bottles to the UK, to Greg Sherwood. And I said, please, I can't sell this wine right now in South Africa. Taste the wine and tell me what you think. And Greg tasted it with a couple of other people, and they came back and they said, this is unbelievable. And this whole thing started. And another miracle happened, which was Greg gave a bottle to somebody, and it ended up in Decanter that year. And Decanter tasted it, and they voted it as one of the top 50 white wines of the world for that year, which was another miracle, because I think if they Googled Colombar or Vredendal, they would not have put it into that category. And it was so good because then South Africans read about it and they were very open-minded. But I must be honest that I think the leading group of people were the expats in the UK, the South Africans there that supports us huge. They got into this and they started spreading the word, and they told their friends about it. And it was interesting because the Cantor said they've never tasted a Colombar as a proper wine before. The closest thing they thought it could be would be Assyrtiko. And I thought, there we go. We don't plant Assyrtiko anymore. We've got enough Colombar in this country. And I always say to people, it's like that ugly, ugly, ugly stepsister who's coming to the ball now. And if you taste the grape and you see it, you actually see what phenomenal juice and acidity and salinity and everything is in there. And it was just badly made. And I think it's time for this ugly stepsister to be the ball now.
You mentioned Assyrtiko a couple of times. You have Yanis staying with you. I was lucky enough to drink both the Assyrtiko from Yanis from Vasaltis and the Naudé Colombar, which we don't call Colombar, together. And the similarity is it's almost eerie. And I'm not the only one to think so. Lisa Harlow is watching the show. Afternoon, Ian. The Smurf wine is still one of my favorite SA wines, probably because it reminds me of Assyrtiko. If you want to know why Smurf, well, there you go, the blue top and the white bottom. Daryl Balfour is also watching. Good evening, Dan, and my other friends on the show. And Aaron Johnson is watching, but I'm going to come to Aaron's question in just a moment. Before I do that, I want to jump over to Sakkie and just try and get a bit of background here, because as good a winemaker as Ian is, as good a winemaker as you are, Danie, Lukas, John, you still had to be working with something. So clearly, Sakkie, there was some extraordinary wine there, some great grapes. They'd just never been perhaps given the love and the TLC that they needed to turn them into something quite so special.
No, I mean, that's very true, Dan. Honestly, I think probably about, I don't know, 70% of that area is planted to Colombar, and most of it goes into horrible white, not even white blends, dry whites, box wine. And this vineyard particularly, I mean, I think the co-op winery, they pay the farmers for that vineyard probably about, it's like 2,500 Rand a ton. So you can imagine that stuff has been hidden away for so many years. And no one has actually ever thought of just picking it and making it in a different style or trying to do anything different. The soils are spectacular. We've got the influence from the ocean. Everything was there. It was just time. Someone just had to come and actually do it. And Jan was at the right place, the right spot, and he did it very well. So I mean, yeah, everything was just the stars aligned, like he always says. It was one of those moments. The stars really aligned, and it was just, yeah, it's perfect. It just worked. So yeah, I'm very happy. I'm very happy for the area. It means a lot, obviously. And there's still a lot of vineyards out there that no one has ever touched. So I'm actually looking forward to what's going to happen in the future, because I think hopefully more people will come there and get some of those grapes and do something different with it. Because yeah, they're just waiting for it.
You mentioned that Ian took the plunge there and led the way, but you weren't too far behind. You were part of the guiding process, and then you produced your own Colombar, and it was almost a difficult one in that you'd got such acclaim for that Revenge of the Crayfish. I think people were waiting for the next big hit single, so to speak. And then you arrived with this Colombar at Cape Wine last year. There must have been 10 people in the first hour who stopped me and said, "Have you tried this Colombar? It is amazing." Was this one of those wines where you kind of just took a gamble to see what happened and were pleasantly surprised? Or did you have an inkling that this could also, like Ian's, turn into something just that little bit special?
Now, it was actually interesting. Me and Jan spoke about Colombar, after he made his, and I think for a long time I was like, "Listen, Sakkie, you're a Chenin guy. You do Chenin." I think I wasn't convinced, and not like I thought I wouldn't be able to make a Colombar, or I just thought like I don't have a vineyard that I can actually vinify. And then somewhere in the last 2 years, the guy from Windpro in Vreendal, Gert, we spoke, and he told me about this. It's the oldest Colombar vineyard in that whole area. And he said I should go and check it out and just see how it looks. And once I got to that vineyard, I was like, "Listen, you don't even have to tell me anything more. This is exactly what I'm looking for." It's, those old vines are gnarly. They basically, a lot of them they're busy. Some of them are busy dying. It's 0.6 hectares, so it's not a lot, but that thing where they say the energy in a certain spot just feels right. And that energy there was just, I could sense it was just the right thing for me. And I think, yeah, the vinification was so basic, and just because the vineyard was already, it was perfect. I didn't really have to do a lot. And I think that wine really, it's an honest expression of that specific spot right there. I think it's the most honest expression I could have done. And I mean, I've done the Misfit, the full-on Misfit, the white blend I do. The 2021 was a Colombar-led blend. So I have worked with Colombar before. I've tried it out. But I think that vineyard for me was just like, I was like, "Listen, you can't blend this in anywhere. You can't, this needs to be by itself, because it's weird. It's such a weird spot. I don't know. Jan's been there. And I mean, I took them there, and Greg Sherwood said, "Listen, it feels like we're on Mars." And it's really like that. It's such an interesting spot. I think, it was just time for me as well. I think that I had to wait it out, and it was the perfect moment for it.
Timing everything with this particular wine. You mentioned the full-on Misfits. I have a bottle which I'm jealously guarding to have on my own with nobody else in due course. We've got some celebrities watching the show. Reality television superstar Martin Lamprecht has a question. We'll get to that question in a moment, the star of My Kitchen Rules. But let me jump over to Lukas. We've had the timing spoken about there by Sakkie. But speaking more broadly, why do you think, Lukas, it's taken quite so long for Colombar to shift away from the image we've had of it for so long and start putting its hand up and say, "Hang on, we can be some pretty premium wine here as well if we want to"?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dan. I actually come from Rossmore, so I've probably had way more Colombar in the distilled portion of the project. Of the grape, which I really love. And then in 2016, a good friend Bertie Coetzee from Loggerenberg in Prieska, we had a few glasses of wine, and he said, "Why don't we try some Colombar from Prieska?" And Prieska is quite a unique place, although it's 900 kilometers from our cellar. It has a lot of chalk in the soils next to the river, and which gives this unbelievable texture to the white wines. And I think, to answer your question, when we started that wine in 2017, which is almost 6 years now ago, we did 2,500 bottles, and it kind of did really well for them. And I think it is, you have to get the wine in people's glasses to break that perception that it is. Because I think it's the stereotype that people, when you tell them it's Colombar, they immediately think of bulk wine, brandy, which is nothing wrong with brandy. But and so I think since John, who makes this unbelievable bubbles, and Paul Gerber at Pullman, who makes for Bertie MCC from Fall Camille, which I think the variety is perfect for. And then Sakkie and Ian, the unicorns, according to Greg Sherwood. I think since those guys started making Colombar, more Colombar got into glasses, and the more people drink it, the more they will talk about it and rave about it. So I think that had played a massive part in it.
It's a wine that, although we are celebrating it in this particular group and the people watching, it's still definitely got a long way to go to a broader market and to becoming more widespread and more mainstream. If in fact it does, do you think that's where Colombar will head? That we will start to see it spoken of alongside of Chenin and Chardonnay and the kind of grapes that generally sit in that more premium category, or is it destined to be something that is a little bit more niche here in South Africa?
Yeah, it's my biggest thing is always what will that wine go for in London, pound wise. If you think of great white wines, let's say £30. That's quite a lot of money for people to spend for a bottle of wine. The biggest thing that I love, and I'm more from the platteland, and I see more the farmers. Colombar is a fantastic grape variety in the Orange River in the Breede Valley because it's an easier grape to grow. It carries nice tonnage. And you have to remember there's obviously a lot of people that produce great versions of it, but there are a lot of big sellers that count on their white wines overseas where the Colombar, even if they blend 10%, they get this beautiful acidity from it, the lower pH, and it just freshens up their white blends. And then to go and tell a farmer in the Orange River that, listen, you have to grow a Colombar that carries minimum 15 tons a hectare, they'll chase you off your farm. So with that, on the soils from there and the amount of water that they have from the Orange River, they get 40, 50 tons quite easily. And the sad thing of our history is we have a big distillation history, and so brandy will always be a massive part in our country. So I think for the farmer, Colombar makes sense because they get a lot of tonnage, and economically it's very viable for them. The fine wine market, I love it. I don't know if it will ever reach the status of Chenin Blanc, but the guys that you have on the show tonight makes unbelievable versions of the variety. And I think small steps at a time, variety will get more accolades. And I'm pretty sure Jan will get this year another 5-star platter. So.
Rumors of a 6-star, according to Greg Sherwood, but we'll find out when those announcements are made later in the year. You talk about the other people on the show making some great wine. Team Carinus is very much amongst there. I mentioned earlier that Colombar from Sakkie was one of the smash hits of Cape Wine, but there's also a great deal of interest in the Carinus, Danie, in your new wine, which I think debuted as a Colombar at Cape Wine. You spent a lot of time with Hugo looking after other people and producing grapes for other people. In terms of deciding to make this one for yourself, what was it that said, here's a grape, here's a varietal that we want to work with and we want to produce something with?
Yeah, Dan, thanks for having me. And that debut at Cape Wine was quite daunting. It was rather tight around about the time of the show, so we were quite pleased by the feedback. We reckoned that we wanted something. Being men, we can't really multitask, so we decided we want to do something similar to Chenin. It's a family member of Chenin. Chenin was made for base wine, for brandies as well, or planted for that, and that's why we have a lot of Colombar in South Africa as well. And we thought we couldn't be too far off, but the main thing was the Rooi Draai soil that we get 2 of our Chenin wines from got this beautiful salinity, and we thought that would work well with Colombar as well, as where it tends to go to that kind of fruit punchy vibe. If you don't look after it, that Rooidraai soil, we felt, just freshens it up. We wanted something new in our portfolio, and we thought that this might work well. And we saw kind of as a gateway drug to Chenin, if you will, and it's been well received. So we're just pleased that what we envisioned for the wine is what we got in bottle eventually.
Is it pure coincidence, Danie, that all of a sudden a whole pile of crackingly good Colombar has arrived on the South African scene, or are you guys secretly on your South African winemakers WhatsApp group planning exactly what you're going to do collectively and just happening to mysteriously all at the same time come up with something really, really special from an unexpected space?
No, well, I think all of these wines of all the guests on the panel tonight has got a very kind of interesting and beautiful story. I think the danger is to always go and look for the next big thing, because we've got beautiful examples of Chenin in South Africa. We've got beautiful examples of Syrah and a few other reds going around. It's not, we don't necessarily have to look for the next big thing. And I agree with what Ian said in the beginning. I was also very interested in stuff like a Certico and so on. But we've got varieties that work well in our climate, and I mean, ours doesn't have a romantic story. The vineyard isn't even that old. It was planted to make quality wine with. The vineyard is 8 years old. So I think one must be careful to kind of, in that WhatsApp group, tell everyone, listen, what's the next big thing? I think everyone had made a kind of a calculated risk. Although many of these guys are bad at maths, but the risk was to give homage to another big South African variety which works well here. So like I said, I don't think we must necessarily try and do the next big thing, but do what's been handed to us and rather make that well.
It's a fundamental challenge of making wine in South Africa. There's so much we do well. What do we settle on? And now that problem gets even greater because Colombar has entered the mix and entered with something of a bang, and not just as a simple, straightforward wine, but also as a bubbles, because John Loubser from Silverthorn has produced something that I think is splendid, and something I've given to a couple of people in the past, like, oh, this is magnificent, I love it. And then you tell them it's made from Colombar and they raise an eyebrow because they can't quite believe that this is actually the case. John, welcome. Lovely to have you back on the show. Tell us the story about deciding to take your 38-year-old vines and turn them into some bubbles.
Yeah, hi, Dan. Good to be on the show. I mean, I concur with what everyone has said. We had this incredible old vineyard. We don't make brandy and we don't make still wine. And I mean, you've got to pay homage to something that's 38 years old. So I thought, well, we're bubbly specialists and that's what we're going to do. And, you know, Colombar per se lends itself extremely well to base wine for Cup Classique. It's got extremely low pH, insanely high acidities, and that's exactly what you need for Cup Classique. But I mean, I listened to what everyone said, and the important thing with Colombar, you know, it's the second most widely planted variety in South Africa. There are well over 350 hectares of vineyards in excess of 35 years old. So you can go and plant the next new thing and you can try and be very creative, but it's far more interesting to go and find old vine Colombar on brilliant terroir. Ours is on shale and limestone, and we use a lot of barrel fermentation, so 500 liter. We actually use acacia barrels. We don't use French or American oak. But if you focus on it and treat it as if it was a regal wine. I mean, I treat it as if it's Chardonnay. You give it all the love and attention. You don't try and make a guava style, unwooded Vin 7 kind of Colombar. Treat it as if it's something special, and you can get incredible results. So very excited. I mean, we have a 30, the vineyard is now 39 years old, but our next one is 30 years old. And we source in. So I source in anything between 30 and 39 years old, and it all goes to the River Dragon. And I mean, we started small, and it's just, I mean, it's growing incredibly well.
In terms of what you're producing, you're using a grape that is not traditionally used in bubbles, and we do that in South Africa. Ken Forrester makes his sparkles from Chenin, although in fairness, I think Ken would probably try and make Cabernet Sauvignon out of Chenin if he thought he could get away with it. You are producing bubbles out of a Colombar. How much of an act of persuasion, how much storytelling did you have to do to get people to try this, to bring them over to his bubbles made of Colombar and Naude, or was it a pretty organic process? Did people just try it, fall in love with it, and bang, job done?
Yeah, no, look, initially I just thought, I mean, the Cup Classic Association sort of battered their eyelids a bit. They didn't particularly like you using these strange varieties, but we are South Africa. We don't have to fall within the protocols of Champagne. So, I mean, you don't have to use Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, or Meunier. Let's be creative. Let's use Chenin, and let's use things that are interesting. But Colombar in particular has this incredible acidity, and it's so easy to whole bunch press it. We get incredible recovery. It's very easy to press, and naming it, you know, the idea is we don't necessarily sell it as Colombar. We sell it as the River Dragon, and then you tell the story and you tell people it's made from Colombar. And you know, I think probably 80% of people that come in don't know what Colombar is, and then you've got to explain that it's the second most widely planted variety. But simply by tasting it, people are hooked. I mean, it's got the beauty and the finesse and the elegance of Colombar is incredible. You've got that white peach and chamomile blossom, and I think the longevity of it. And time will tell. I think, you know, 20, 30 years ago, the Chenin Blanc renaissance started. And lots of people said, you know, Chenin Blanc is the firewood of the century. But when people focused on it, they changed perceptions. And I think Colombar has that potential. I'm not saying it's going to necessarily go that way, but if you give it the due attention, it's really going to do well.
And that is exactly what everybody on the show this evening has done. And they've fallen in love with Colombar. In fact, some of them have fallen in love with Colombar to what is almost a slightly worrying degree. Sakkie Mouton, am I right in saying that you actually wrote a song about Colombar? That's how much you fell in love with this particular grape.
Yes, Dan. Yeah, no, I love playing guitar, so I went to the vineyard and I kind of, I wanted to get a song that can go with a video that I made for the release video for this Colombar. And I have to say, I guess it works really well. There's no words to it yet, but maybe in the next 2 years I can get some words and put that with the backtracker.
Maybe we can all chip in and become part of that. Sounds like a top 10 hit in the making. I mentioned earlier we had a question from our reality TV star, Martin Lamprecht from My Kitchen Rules, who, together with his father-in-law, very kindly gave away their spot on the show. Farm and get back to making and drinking wine. Maras likes to know, Sakkie, how long does it take to press Assyrtiko?
Yeah, I got a little bit of Assyrtiko in last week. It's the first time working with it. And then it was so funny. I actually met Janus. The first time I met him was on my way from the West Coast, just outside of Pakketberg. Him and Jan was on their way to the West Coast to pick some Chenin Blanc. And I met them next to the road. And Janus was like, listen, what do you have on the back of the bakkie? And I said, Assyrtiko. And he said, well, you're joking. Wow, what is this? Like, where? And I said, no, honestly, it's Assyrtiko. And immediately he jumped out and starts tasting berries. And he shows me on the pip, there's a little spot. That's the clone. It's the aromatic clone and all the stuff. And then Martin rocks up at the cellar while I'm pressing it because it was a half a ton. So I decided to do it through a basket press because, I don't know, I thought foot stomping it would be the best way to go. And Janus told me, you need to be very careful. There's tannins in the skins and all of that. And Martin rocked up there while we were busy. And I don't think I'll ever put it through a basket press again because it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to press. I was so tired after half a ton through that basket press. So, Martin, it takes... I would have, if I didn't have an intern there, it would have probably been done by 2025, I think. Yeah.
Oh dear. May I recommend, Sakkie, a trip over to Santorini to go and visit Yanis and his team? It's a beautiful island. Gee, they make some stunning wine. In fact, I've got some on my lineup for dinner a little later on this evening. Martin had a question. There was also a question came in from Aaron Johnson, which I will put to Lukas, who I think is now back. Hi, Sakkie, Ian, and Lukas, watching from France. Any tips from Colombar brackets D over here? Lukas, anything in France one should look out for other than a consignment of a Loggerenberg that's somehow found itself over to Paris?
Is he expecting tips of what to do with French Colombar, or does he want South African Colombar?
Oh, I think answer any way you deem fit.
You have to ask Danie Carinus. I don't make any Colombar for myself or Louverland. I make for them, but I think Colombar in France is just made for cognac. Thomas, I have a French intern here from Hermitage. Thomas, what do they use Colombar for in France?
I never had wine from Colombar in France. Never. And I think I never heard about that before.
There, you guys heard it. They don't drink still wine Colombar in France. It's cognac, so maybe that might be the next big thing, Danie, in France, eh?
Well, that actually leads rather nicely, Lukas, to what my follow-up question was going to be anyway, and that is the potential now. We've spoken about a few people in London, Greg Sherwood, Lisa watching the show today, getting a sense of the potential of Colombar and how well we can make it. Do you feel it really has got the potential to go and become something that is a South African signature, that people go, oh, South African Colombar, that's something I must drink?
Definitely. I think, for me, the white and red, I put Cinsault quite next to Colombar, the varieties. But of course, Cinsault, the reason why we have such old Cinsault vineyards is Cinsault makes fantastic brandy as well. And I think Colombar could be the next Cinsault because it's South Africa makes without a doubt the best Cinsault in the world. And I think Colombar could be that because it's something that you're not going to find in a lot of wine bars or restaurants. And when people hopefully drink a bottle of great still Cinsault, Colombar, they'll know that it might just be from South Africa.
And to that end, Lukas, the potential to be able to drink it down the line, is Colombar a wine where in 10, maybe 15 years' time, a really good bottle of Colombar will not only still be drinkable, but be in a really exciting, a really well-developed and almost kind of majestic space?
Yeah, it's the 2017 and 2018 Fall Camille from Louverland, which we did. And I remember Jancis wrote a beautiful article about the 2018 Fall Camille. I opened, Bertie is a very stingy man when it comes to wine. I opened one of my last two bottles a few months ago, and the wine was still unbelievable. And I think that's massively due to the varieties, great pH and high acidity. So all those factors makes for a beautiful wine, and especially John's MCC. I love those Zero Dosage dry MCC wines that have just this beautiful energy and nervousness to it, which Colombar always has.
We've got watching Angela Lloyd on the show, who echoes much of what has been said this evening. Ian, Sakkie, Lukas, Danie, and John, with their individual distinctive Colombars, are what keeps South African wine so exciting and front of mind here and internationally. All of these wines are terrific. I want to pick up on that comment from Lukas on John and his bubbles. We often talk on this show, John, of the role of bubbles beyond just a celebratory glass or a toast or an aperitif, and how well you can have a dinner paired entirely with bubbles, if nothing more than it. How well will Colombar sit with food? Is it a wine that really lends itself, whether still or in the form of bubbles, to something that can take you through an entire meal?
Yeah, well, what was interesting, because when we released the first River Dragon, I had to spend a lot of time, drink it a lot, and kind of get my head around it. So we had it with every form of food possible, with curries, with sushi, with paella, with you name it. It's a great food wine. It's got beautiful acidity. It's got that, it just cuts through the fat of meals. So no, I think it goes extremely well, definitely. But it does come back to, you've got to make it seriously, and you've got to give it the due attention.
And explain that in layman's terms, because there are many of us watching, one of us hosting the show, for whom the making of wine is still an awfully mysterious and somewhat intimidating art. Making wine is making wine, surely. What's the difference in terms of producing something that allows us to now take Colombar seriously, to take it away from its old perception, and now create it in a space where people are going, oh my goodness, this is incredible, where can I get more?
Yeah, well, I mean, historically, Colombar would have been harvested, midday, late afternoon, would come in hot. It would be fermented, and absolutely no attention, would have gone into big stainless steel tanks. No one really cared. So if you turn around and actually value it, harvest it early, do whole bunch harvesting, or whatever your preference is there. You could do Colombar fermented on the skins. You could, there are many options, but the idea is to come in, use barrel fermentation, use neutral yeasts where you can actually get the expression of Colombar. Don't use flavor forming yeasts. And it's a mindset. You've got to actually treat it as if it is a noble variety. It obviously isn't, but you have to have the mindset and go in and say, we're going to really treat it and make something special of it. And if you give it that due, it performs brilliantly. It's just, and the other thing about Colombar, it is such a beautiful variety to work with. It presses easily, it settles beautifully. It's just, it's not a problem grape. Pinot Noir is challenging. If you work with Riesling, it's difficult. There are lots of varieties that are not easy to make. But Colombar you just have to, it's easy to make, and just give it that just focus on it.
The River Dragon is a non-vintage. You speak with such love and tenderness about Colombar and its potential. Does this suggest that on the horizon there might be a vintage Colombar bubbles from Silverthorn that we can treasure and keep and see develop over the years?
Well, strictly speaking, they are all vintage. We've just labeled them as non-vintage. But yeah, I think we'll watch the space and see how it develops. Our approach was to just give it 12 months on the lease. Otherwise, it becomes unaffordable. But it's old vine, and we've given it barrel fermentation, and we've given a lot of focus onto and as I say, it's sourced from shale and limestone. So we focused on the intrinsics of it. But who knows? Maybe we can flip it and start putting vintage on it.
We'll watch this space. Danie, you've got the 22 in the bag to great acclaim last year. Is the new vintage being worked on? And what have you learned from that first Colombar that shapes you going forward in terms of how you and Hugo are going to produce ensuing wines?
Well, I talked about the risk we took, but it wasn't a massive risk. We we didn't really make a lot. I think we were still nervous of how it was going to be received. Still not really believing in the whole process, but yeah, we've been wooed by this grape, and we will make more in 23. So yeah, but approach is the same. I think with our philosophy, I think it's quite foolproof. We get good fruit, and we've got good winemakers facilitating that fruit into a bottle. So yeah, Lukas has still got some Colombar coming to his cellar this year, and maybe hopefully quite a bit more in the next few years to come.
And straying away directly from Colombar for just a second, the majority of the business that you and your cousin do, so as I understand it, is supplying other people and helping other people out. Is the success of the Colombar perhaps nudging you in the direction of taking what's still a very niche brand and then broadening it a bit and then making it a little bit more widespread?
Yeah, it's if I understand you correctly, if it's something that we'll kind of our business model is kind of based on working with a lot of winemakers and planting and farming fruit for them, what they need for their particular brands. I think there needs to be incentive both ways around to commit in trying something. But there's no reason why we can't dabble around with a few hectares of Colombar and plant some young vines that will be old vines for the generations to come. Why not?
Speaking of vintage, Ian, jumping back to you as we come. Geesh, we've rushed through. We come towards the end of the show. This Colombar adventure is part of a far greater one that you've had over the years, making some terrific wine. In the context of all of this wine that you've made over the years, from so many different varietals, so many different vintages, where does Colombar sit on the excitement level for Ian Naudé?
Dan, I've been listening to these guys, and a lot what they said is so true. I just want to say why I was so incredibly happy about Colombar for a long time was when it came across my road, I thought, you know what, we've been taught for many years to do what the French has been doing, or what the Germans, or what the Spanish has been doing. And then I think when I met Janus and the others, and I went to Santorini, and we wanted to do Acertico and Vermentinos and all these things, it was almost like a big wake-up call where I got, we've got this stuff. It's been here for 350 years plus. And I think the guys in the UK, they're usually my to-go-to people, because they can get anything in the world in the UK. They can buy from any country. They can do anything. I've never seen them so excited about Colombar and Cinsault from South Africa. And I would ask them why. And they said, because nobody else is doing this. And then Neil Martin, which was one of my biggest tastings or best tastings I've ever done, he took, I don't know how long, on the Colombar, and he said, you know, I've never tasted a bottled Colombar as a still wine. And it's one of my favorite wines right now. And I can't think that South Africa hasn't jumped on this bandwagon. And I honestly think we're looking too far and too wide. And I think Johan said we've got something like 350 hectares of this. In there, there's a lot of jewels. And I think the exciting thing about South Africa is the younger generation of winemakers. They're excited. They want to do proudly South African, and they want to do things that nobody else is doing. What better thing than Colombar? And Johan said something really well. He said, many years ago, Chenin Blanc was like firewood, and people were joking about anything Chenin Blanc. A couple of years later, where are we? We're in the top of the world with Chenin Blanc. We're competing against countries who's also doing this for many years. Nobody's doing Colombar. That French guy that's sitting there with Lukas said cognac. That other guy said, what should they do with French Colombar? Make cognac. Leave us with, we've got the history of 300 years. I really think it's one of the most exciting things, and being in the industry for many years, I'm tired of seeing how people copy other countries to be on a level to be accepted. It's time for us to take Cinsault, Colombar, and some of our older clones that's been here for many years and almost revamp, or not even revamp, just respect it. You ask people about the winemaking thing of Colombar. I never look at Colombar as not a quality grape, because what I got from that vineyard, it's a 37 year old vineyard. That vineyard's got its own story. I don't put any yeast with it. I want the natural yeast of that. And I think it showcases that salinity, that sandy soils, and that mist that you get from the ocean that comes in every night. Why would you want to do something different? I think it's fine-tuning that vineyard. It's going up there, tasting the grapes, understanding it, understanding the soils, understanding what can you do better to showcase this vineyard. And I think that one of the biggest things Neil Martin said, he's never been up to Vredendal, and he said something like, when I taste this grape, I can see myself sitting in that vineyard. That's the biggest compliment any winemaker can get. Not awards and stars and everything. If you can take a grape that people thought was cognac and brandy, and you can treat it with just respect, because we didn't do anything. Natural yeast, natural everything, nothing added to that wine. And you ferment that in a proper way. But another big thing is picking it on the right time. Colombar is one of those things, and I think Lukas said it, when you pick it too early, it becomes this green acidic water. When you pick it too late, it's this guava explosion. And then you ferment it with Vin 7, and you make it a guava bomb, not even an explosion. Why do you want to do this? Pick the grape when the grape shows you, I'm in perfect place now to be picked. That's all it needs. And I think people are looking at South Africa, and you can ask people like Lisa and Craig and all these people, they're excited about it because they want to show their friends, this is a 300-year history of a cultivar that's now only treated with respect, but look at the quality of it. And I think it's one of those things where we have all these things. We don't have to look too far. We don't have to go to other countries and want to plant things that works in other countries. We've got it in our own country.
And I think that is as comprehensive as an endorsement as you would hope to get from one of the godfathers of modern South African wine. The one final question I will leave hanging, but we'll come back to it in due course. Neil Martin saying he's never had a still Colombar together. So is there an element of the novelty value that is helping Colombar? Well, we'll know if Colombar is still going strong in a few years that that's not the case. But hopefully that novelty value is getting people drinking it. I reckon once they're drinking it, they will be hooked. Guys, it's been an absolute joy having all of you on the show. We could have done 2 hours here quite happily. What I love about doing a show like this is it just celebrates such a cool and exciting part of an industry that is in just a really, really inventive and inspiring space. And you guys are a great part of that. So Ian, Sakkie, Lukas, John, Danie, guys, thank you very, very much indeed. I've got Colombar to finish off. And it leaves me to ask one last question while I've got all of you on stream. And raise a hand if you know the answer. Why do we call it Colombar in South Africa and not Colombard? Where did the D go? Does anybody know? Yes, John Loubser.
A bard is a Celtic poet. So you don't want to say Colombard, you want to say Colombar.
That sounds like a suspiciously made-up answer. Danie, have you got one?
I think we're just lazy. My name is Daniel, and then they just left out the L to call me Danie. But I think it's also an issue with the place where it was planted the most was along the West Coast, and you get a lot of guys who pray, and Colombar with the D at the end is just too difficult to say. I think that's the one.
Lukas, this is a serious answer, Lukas.
Yes, this is a serious question. So in Rosenthal, where brandy is the house staple, when you drink brandy a lot, brandy is made with Colombard, and still wine is made with Colombar. So.
Professor Van Loggerenberg wrapping up our discussion. Guys, thank you so much. It's been a delight. Ian, enjoy your evening with Yanis and your Greek wines. Lukas, with your army of unpaid French labor, and the rest of you guys, thank you for a lovely, lovely evening, some lovely wine, and we look forward to having you all back on the show again soon.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye.
Bye.
That is a proper rockstar collection for one wine show. Ian Naudé, who I think Greg Sherwood voted winemaker of the millennium last year. He's just such a lovely man and makes terrific wine. Sakkie Mouton with his new Colombar to add to the rest of his cult collective. Lukas van Loggerenberg, Danie with his cousin Hugo, and John Loubser making that River Dragon out of bubbles from Colombar. Just a really exciting space. That wraps us up for this evening. I am off to enjoy an eclectic selection of wine this evening, of which the Assyrtiko and the Colombar will be but two. And I will be back with you on the show on Monday, where amongst other things, we will give you a little bit more notice on a special event, a special live broadcast on Monday, the 1st of March, which celebrates a brand new chapter for the Dan Really Likes Wine story. And if that all sounds a bit cloak and dagger, well, it's meant to. Thanks to some wonderful guests. And a very special thank you to my regular consultant, the wonderful Melu Lambert, who gave me so much information around Colombar. And, well, there's not much about wine she doesn't know, but proved particularly useful today. Lisa Harlow, loved listening to everyone talk about Colombar, says Lisa, in wrapping up the show, watching from the UK. Lisa, lovely to have you, along with Daryl. Look out for Daryl on the show next week with something special. Aaron, Maras, Angela, and everybody else. I'll see you back again next week. Have a lovely Thursday evening, and make it your mission before the end of the month. Go and find a bottle of Colombar. If you haven't had it before, I think you're in for a real treat. Goodbye.